Hollywood. Cecil B. DeMille became one of the most renowned directors in Hollywood, his name becoming synonymous with the word epic. He would go on to create some of the biggest movies of all time, including 10 Commandments. He began as a struggling playwright and stage director. It is from this background that he would draw his first film, The Squaw Man, an adaptation of a popular 1905 play of the same name. This would be both to the film's benefit in the short run and unfortunately to its detriment in the long run. DeMille's background was in stage, and so to prepare for his role as a film director, he spent one day in the Edison studios to learn the entire art of film. Needless to say, to hedge against his technical blind spots, fresh-faced producers Samuel Goldwyn, still going by the name Goldfish at this time, and co-producer Jesse L. Lasky hired short film director Oscar C. Apfel, I believe, yes, to assist in directing duties. This was an ambitious endeavor, with two relatively new producers of movies financing a project by one director with no film experience and another director with no experience in long-form storytelling. Short films were still the norm for theaters, and studios and features were considered artistically risky. Goldwyn and Lasky were taking a big risk on their first big-budget feature, and there was a lot that could go wrong, and, well, a lot did. The Squaw Man was supposed to be shot in Arizona, but the location was switched to what is now modern-day Hollywood, making The Squaw Man what many people consider to be one of the first, if not the first, feature Hollywood film. Instantly, the production ran into trouble, with film negatives being destroyed, DeMille actually being shot at on 2 occasions. DeMille theorized that this was all the work of some disgruntled employee, but there are a lot of historians now that speculate that it could have been bullying tactics used by the Patents Trust. Luckily, DeMille had a second set of negatives stored at his home, and it avoided basically destroying the entire film. Speaking of destroying the film, the movie had issues with its perforated sprocket holes on the film stock. This required Goldwyn to spend a huge amount of money sending the film to a lab where new strips of celluloid were glued over the entire film and new holes had to be perforated. In the end, the cost of the film ballooned to $15,000, but fortunately, when it opened in February of 1914, it became a massive hit, bringing in $244,000. Remember how I said that adapting a popular play was both to its benefit and detriment? Well, the popularity of the stage play likely helped bring people to see the film, and its fame made for an easy viewing watch with people already familiar with all the material. This, unfortunately, is also what contributed to this being very, very hard to watch for modern-day audiences. The movie follows the story of a wealthy Englishman who takes the blame for his cousin and business partner's embezzlement of trust funds. This leads to him fleeing the law and the country and heading to America, where he goes west and marries a Native American woman. Here he finds a more modest Western life. Unfortunately, the story of making this movie and its various accomplishments are significantly more interesting than the actual plot. First, you have the issue of the setup, which is difficult to follow, and the silent medium, without any prior knowledge of the story beforehand, makes it pretty difficult to figure out what's going on. It's a little too conservative on its intertitles, which makes you need to almost look up what's actually happening to figure out what's happening, I guess. Unfortunately, once you get a grasp on the story's sort of nonsensical start, it really feels a little too straightforward and simple for its own good. It starts giving the main character very few interesting choices or conflict. All this while being shot in the cheap outdoors and with editing that jumps around from scene to scene without any real flow or connective tissue. DeMille was still new to this art form, and he was still very far from perfecting his craft. The main character of Jim Wingate, played by Dustin Furman, comes off as pretty much a complete idiot. In my first watch through, I thought he had just been framed for his cousin's crimes and wondered why he hadn't just, gotten a lawyer, I guess. But it's actually much worse than that. Jim instead chooses to take the blame for his cousin's crime. I had to look up his motivation because it was such, stupid nonsense. Apparently, Jim doesn't want to profit from his cousin's downfall, and he's in love with his cousin's wife. So, instead he takes the fall for him and flees the country. Brilliant. It's great. He's an idiot. It really is hard to sympathize with a character who's such a noble, moron that he would sacrifice himself so his cousin can keep stealing from, I don't know, like charities and orphans and stuff. Why? Just simply because he doesn't want to ruin the life of his cousin's wife, a wife who he can't be with anyways, because he's now fled the country and, his cousin's not in jail. The film doesn't really help at all with understanding Jim's line of thinking, as we're just pretty much supposed to just go along with it and say like, yeah, that makes sense. Sure. On the upside, Jim quickly flees to Wyoming, where he marries a native there, Natu Rich, I think? Natu Rich? Something like that. Played by Red Wing. She actually seems to be adaptive, problem-solving, and loyal even to a fault. She has a lot more actually going on with her that's interesting, like having the law on her heels, and she's probably more relatable just because she's not making unfathomable, bonehead decisions. It helps that they actually got someone of native heritage to play this role, because usually in this time period, typically they just get somebody white and put on makeup, which is why you see so much blackface and stuff like that during this time. Yet the film still throws her under the bus at the end with an improbable fate that doesn't really kind of click with who her character has been through the rest of the film. And with that, I think we're kind of starting to get into spoiler territory here, so if you want to watch this movie, just kind of stop here, maybe come back later, maybe? Okay. The movie ends by handing the main character maybe one too many freebies. First, he has to deal with his cousin, or doesn't have to deal with him because he conveniently just happens to fall off a cliff and die, but not before admitting to all his crimes. Jim then has to be spared the decision of having to pick between his cousin's wife, Diana, and his current native wife, Natu Rich, when the latter commits suicide after Jim sends their son back to England, and the law starts to close in on her. Now, this is sort of what I was talking about when I said it really didn't fit with her character, because up until this point, she really seemed more the sort to sort of grab a horse and go chase down her son who's been taken away, than just sort of give up and kill herself. But the movie, or play, if the ending is the same, kind of just wants to take the easy way out. It at least handles the death somewhat tactfully by fading out with Jim kind of cradling her body, but you still know that this just frees him up to go find his son and old love, making this all feel really, really cheap. In the end, the movie was a monumental success, and it pushed forward the medium, and it gave us two of the biggest producers of all time, and one of history's greatest directors. Samuel Goldwyn would go on to found Goldwyn Pictures, and would merge with other companies to form MGM. His brother-in-law, Jesse L. Lasky, would become one of the founders of what would become Paramount Pictures. Cecil B. DeMille, meanwhile, would go on to become one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. Yet The Squaw Man is a story that, as the play faded from pop culture, without the notoriety, the movie fails to stand up on its own, and the cracks in the weak character choices and lazy narrative really start to show even more. This is a film best remembered for launching the careers of the people behind it, rather than the forgettable final product. And that's it for my review of The Squaw Man from 1914. If you enjoyed this review, feel free to subscribe or check out some of my other videos, and by some, I mean the one other one that's up right now. Coming up next, we'll be looking at Intolerance and also 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea from 1916. So stay tuned if you're interested in checking out those historic movies. Thank you, and keep those reels turning.